Hello and welcome to Practicalli with me, John Stevenson. Thank you very much for joining me, and thank you for taking part in these videos where I'm learning and sharing what I'm learning with you as we go along. So this week we're going to cover some basics of continuous integration. So we're building on it's a generative testing we've done with spec and the looking at unit test runners for Clojure test style unit tests in Clojure. And so kind of natural progression from testing locally is to share your code and test with others and test your code with other people's contributions, and that's usually done using a continuous integration server. So there's been things like Jenkins, been around for ages. There's quite a few services online and quite a few approaches you can take to doing continuous integration. This week we're going to look at something called CircleCI, which is developed at least in part in Clojure and Clojure script. And it's a really nice, simple online service, which you can also use. You can also download that and use it locally as well. And I'm going to show you how it's fairly easy to set up once you know a few key pieces of information. So we're going to cover those today. Okay, whoop. Excuse me. Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah, so if you want to know anything about Practicalli, so the work I've been doing specifically for Clojure Together to update the books. So I'm working on these books and bringing them up to date, especially with things like using the Clojure CLI tools as the default kind of project management approach, and also kind of adding more examples and more practical guides to that. So they're available. So the Practicalli Spacemacs book is fairly well developed. I'm going to do some more work on the Clojure web apps. There's a lot of other frameworks I want to cover, and the Practicalli Clojure one's progressing quite nicely. There's lots of examples there, and a lot of the things that we're doing in these live broadcasts are going into the Practicalli Clojure book in a way that's nice and easy to digest, hopefully. If you want to get in touch, then Clojure in Slack is a useful way to do that. They've got a Practicalli channel. There's also some really useful other channels as well. And if you want to motivate me and keep me going, then there's ways to do that as well. And there's also a bunch of learning resources down at the bottom, quite useful. There's an awful lot of videos on Clojure out there as well. And I'm going to be doing some more videos in between the live broadcasts as well in the next couple of months. So this week we're going to have a look at the Clojure, Practicalli Clojure book. So this is the this is the book that's getting the most development time going at the moment. It's built with Spacemacs as well, and yeah, the main focus of this is to use Clojure with the CLI tools and the deps.edn approaches. And so I'm filling in a lot of the mostly there's not a huge amount of complexity in this. It's a nice kind of simple infrastructure to kind of support your Clojure development. But just knowing a few kind of essential things can speed things up as well. So that's what the book's also covering. And especially around Clojure and testing, a lot of the testing stuff, especially on CircleCI, is more centered around using Leiningen, but there are images there that support what we call the tools deps infrastructure, so like deps.edn projects and the Clojure command line. So we're going to show you how that works, but I also can show you there's a CircleCI sample project which uses Leiningen as the build tool. And just going to show you the difference, because it's if you look at the instructions for the CircleCI guide for Clojure, it's very Leiningen oriented. I'm going to do some pull requests to this page as well. See if they'll accept it to include how to do this for Clojure CLI tools as well. Just before we start, so you might be wondering whether to use Leiningen or whether to use the Clojure CLI tools. And I think for a lot of projects, there's not a huge great difference in using either tool. There are some advantages in either tool. If you're already using a project and it's already got Leiningen, there's not a major incentive to push over to Clojure CLI tools unless you're having issues with Leiningen, or unless you just want to simplify the way you manage your project as well. There's lots of really useful plugins for Leiningen, although I do find some of them do abstract away too much and make the the development, REPL-driven development process a little bit more challenging. And so I found with the Clojure CLI tools, it's a lot easier to see what's actually happening. And I think in terms of your build process, your tooling process, it's very good to have lots of transparency when you're actually building it, because if something goes wrong and you need to fix it, then the clearer you understand how it all works, the easier it is to fix it quickly and to carry on with the more essential development work. So I think to me the Clojure CLI tools are a much simpler, streamlined approach, while still offering pretty much all the important features that you actually need for development. So if we look at the GitHub Practicalli, I got the Clojure deps.edn repository here. So this is the configuration that I've built up, and it's to be used for all projects as a default for all projects. It's very much inspired by the work that Sean Caulfield did, and but I've taken the approach that this is going to be like the default set of tools, the default set of namings, which you may override in the local deps.edn file for a project, or you might have a more specific name for your aliases as well. So I've defined things like creating projects, running REPL for a REBL for a better REPL experience, and using REBL for data visualization, that sort of stuff. And so these are very explicit names, so they do explain exactly what the alias is doing, and you can just use these aliases when you actually so if you want to do test coverage, then you just use the test coverage alias, and it runs a particular tool alongside the normal Clojure process. And so you can run a project against several different test runners, and you might get different outputs or different features from each. Some might run faster than the others as well. So it gives you an easy way to experiment with lots of different tooling on there as well, and you're not tied to any particular one. And then if you choose that one specific tool is the best for a project, then you can also put that alias into the local project deps.edn as well. So I think deps.edn does give a lot more flexibility than Leiningen, but Leiningen's been around, I think, almost since the start of Clojure, and has a great wealth of plugins that you can actually use to get you up and running really quickly as well. Some people say it's a little bit slower. It certainly is. Certainly, Leiningen does run two virtual machines, one for itself and one for the project you're actually running. So in that respect, it's using more resources. And I have found Clojure CLI tools to be like really, really fast. So I haven't had any problems like restarting REPLs or anything like that. So there are a number of small advantages, I think, to Clojure CLI tools, and when you put them all together, I think it's definitely worth it for new projects. But again, there's no massive impetus to change all of your Leiningen projects into Clojure CLI tools unless you have some specific needs. Okay, let's get back to Clojure CLI. Sorry, CircleCI. So this week we're going to look at Clojure, specifically a CircleCI continuous integration as a service, and it's very simple to use. So you just go to CircleCI.com and you just create an account, and I already have one inside, and I'm already logged in as me. And it's wired up to, I'm using my GitHub account to log in, and so I've got access to all of the organizations that I'm with. So you might just have your user account in here, which is JRocket. But if you're also a member of some GitHub organizations, then you can also select those as well. So like the Practicalli is a GitHub organization. And I can go in there and I see I've already got some workflows, some pipelines already running, and I can go in and add projects and choose from all of the projects that are actually in that organization, and I can decide whether I want to set them up to run on CircleCI. Cool. Oops. So let's go back to here. So so in the Practicalli Clojure book, there's the testing Clojure, integration testing, CircleCI, just link in the chat. And so there is a free plan, so it's not going to cost you anything to start using CircleCI. I think most CIs have a free plan. So it's there is a limit, so you can have unlimited projects, but there's a limit on how many you can run. You'll eventually run out of free credits each month. If you've got like 1,000 projects and you run them all every day, then it's going to quickly run out. But if you've got like a modest sized number of projects that you run, then you should be able to do the kind of basic continuous integration for free. But obviously when you're working in a commercial aspect, then obviously you would pay for the service. And I think the only really sticking point I come up with, which was quickly solved, was choosing the images that you're actually going to run. So CircleCI basically uses a Docker image. So if you go into the language guides, it's got a sample configuration, and you can show here that we've got the Docker part of the configuration. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, I do seem to have a bit of a cough this morning. So there's a Docker section to this configuration file. So this is just a configuration.yaml file that you put into a .circleci directory, and then when you push this to GitHub, then it's going to be picked up by CircleCI and run this configuration for running the project and running tests and so on. So this is the build configuration, how it's actually going to build things, and we're going to choose a particular image. So this is a CircleCI Docker image, and it's in the classification of Clojure. Specifically, the image name is Leiningen 2.9.1. So this is using the Leiningen build tool. It's already in the image, so you don't need to download and install Leiningen into Clojure. And as it's a Clojure image, it should also have Java installed in there as well. Although the image name itself doesn't actually say which version is installed, so you might want to use different images. And actually I did notice that the actual there is a Luminous project in here as an example project. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually work with the Leiningen plugin, because this has been updated since they added the project, and there is a plugin, a Leiningen plugin, that doesn't seem to work. But I managed to fix that in the example I did. So in this CircleCI sample, then this is kind of a walkthrough of how I've done this. Excuse me. So I basically logged into CircleCI. I select when you first if you've got multiple organizations, then it's going to ask you which one you want to work in. This is just going to be the initial one you fall into. If you've only got your own account, then it's just going to choose that. And you can switch, once you've logged in, you can switch between your different organizations as well. And if you don't see it, then you can actually go in and manually choose it as well. And then you go and set up a project. I clicked on projects and selected the CircleCI just by typing it in. So this was the project I created from the example. So I basically forked that off there, which I already got a fork for. So I created this fork in my own GitHub account. And then I just basically added this fork to CircleCI. And then you select it, set up the project, and it gives you a it gives you this configuration file builder, which you can go in and edit things as well. And although it uses a slightly different version of Leiningen here, actually, if I'd used that rather than the example one it gave you in the web page, because the web page gives you a different version. This one doesn't actually work, and I think this one probably does. But you add the project. Once you've got the configuration there, then it starts running, and every time you push a change to your GitHub repository, then it's going to run a build. And then this one failed because it had an issue for building the project, and it turns out that it doesn't actually like running on only likes running on Java 8. And so when I run this locally on my own computer, I basically cloned the repository that I did. So I basically cloned this locally and just ran it as a project, just using line run and line test. And it was only working on Clojure on Java 8. So basically updated this to use a different image. So it is kind of, I guess the most important thing is it is kind of important to understand which is the right image to use. And there is a wide selection of Docker images available. And so there's quite a lot of choice there. So you don't have to create your own image, which you could do. You can create, you could just use a bare image or a bare image with Java and add your own tooling on top of there as well. So if you've got a mixture of, if you want to do something different for Shadow CLJS, or you had a mixture of Clojure and some other language, then you might want to create your own image if you can't find something there as well. But basically any Docker image you can use with that from CircleCI. You can kind of build up any of those images to include any other additional things in there as well. You just put that into the configuration file. And let's go back here. So I did put in a list of things. So there's a list of the Docker Hub images. And you can also go and have a look at the Docker repository as well, so you can actually see what is in those images as well, if you're not quite sure if the name isn't descriptive enough. So the one I'm using for the Clojure CLI tools is OpenJDK 11, so we know what version of Java it's using, and we know it's using tools deps and the version of tools deps it's actually using as well. And this is the latest version. This is the same version I'm using locally on my computer. So it's useful to have the same environment in your Docker image as certainly the environment you're deploying into, and also preferably the environment you're actually developing the application in. And of course you can actually have multiple images you're actually going to run builds through, just to test if the application is running on like various versions of Java, for example. So I know some library developers will actually run their libraries across several different versions of Java, just to make sure that it's working okay, because there might be the occasional edge case where something only runs on Java or Java 8, and that's partly because the Java has changed in the way it deals with modules, and so there could be issues with certain libraries not being too happy about newer versions of Java. But in the main, that's been usually pretty solved pretty quickly in the Clojure world. And I think OpenJDK 11 is a lot more common. It is the current Java long-term support thing, so it probably is the one you want to be using for most of your projects until the next long-term support of OpenJDK comes out. There's also this really useful kind of Java tags things as well, so it's a quick way to browse through the available images you've got in here as well. And so you can just and you can also, because it's JSON, you can programmatically go and find the images you want. Again, it's only just exposing the names, but there's quite a lot of their ones in there as well. But yeah, it could be useful to find out if there's new JDK ones. So if you did want to test it with a new version of Java, then that's very easy to do. I believe Buster is the Debian image, so these are all Debian Linux based ones. Be interesting to see if there's any Alpine based Docker images as well, which may be a little bit smaller, although I don't think there's going to be a huge amount of difference there. I assume the Debian image is very small, kind of almost like network-like install of Debian, which has just got the essential networking tools, and Java if it's an OpenJDK one as well. Excuse me. Ooh, I do have a bit of cough today. Okay, let's do something from scratch. So we've done the so yeah, the Leiningen one is there, and if you want to do the example and you prefer Leiningen still, you haven't quite got into Clojure CLI tools, then the CircleCI example project, it does work. You just need to choose the Java 8 one, and also if there's I did find an issue with the status monitor application I did this back in October 2018. That's a while ago. So I'm actually going to update this with a Clojure CLI deps.edn configuration. At the moment this is using Leiningen, and the one thing I did find is that this Leiningen ring 12.4 version, that doesn't actually work with newer versions of Leiningen. But if you upgrade to 12.5 or newer, then that resolves that as well. So you could just choose an image. So initially I just chose an image, which is the Leiningen 2.8, which works fine, because there was a change in Leiningen that broke line ring, but then in 12.5, line ring 12.5, then that was fixed again. So it's very simple. So you've got jobs, you've got a working directory, you've got the options for the environment. Checkout is just checking out your source code from the GitHub repository, which you've wired up by connecting CircleCI to, and obviously the repository that this YAML file is in. We've got a cache, and so this basically, if it downloads any dependencies, it's going to put them into the cache, and it uses a particular key to be able to uniquely identify the cache. So when you run this build again, it'll go and look up the cache, and because that saves it separately from the Docker image, because the Docker images are just disposable. So when you do a build, it fires up a Docker image, and then it goes off and tries to find a cache. So it's trying to restore the cache. So this will be the cache of dependencies. So this is your your .m2, your Maven repository. And if there's a cache available, it will load that in, so it doesn't have to download any dependencies for your project, and that just speeds up the build of your project on CircleCI. Then once we've got the cache in, we run the deps just to make sure, because we might have added a dependency to the project since we ran it last. So if you've just added a new dependency to a new library to the project, then that'll pull that down, and it'll also add that to the cache. So it'll update the cache. So again, you'll only have to download dependencies once. So that just streamlines the whole running process. And then you can define what it's actually going to run. So here we're just running the tests, and you can have as many -run entries as you want. So you can do tests, you can build artifacts, and you can connect to other services. So then, one of the next videos I'll do is how to connect that to a service like Heroku to actually just build a successful. If the tests are successful, then you actually just go off and build the artifacts and deploy them on Heroku, so you've got a new live version of your application. And so for this project, all I did was go into the code and just update this line ring plugin, which is used to do things like line run server to actually start the application, and that then I can use the later version of the Leiningen Docker image for that. Okay, so that's the Leiningen approach. So let's look at create something from scratch and show you how kind of CI is kind of how I would use that inside the development. I'll do this very early on, as soon as I start writing tests, which as soon as I've got some clear designs in my head about the application, I'll start writing tests. And so that's a good point, if you haven't already, to wire up the CI. And there's no reason why you couldn't just wire up the CI as soon as you create the project, to be honest. So this is an approach here where we basically just create a new project and then pretty much straight away just add the configuration, because once the configuration is done, then you can just leave it to run. You don't need to go back and change it unless you want to do more with CircleCI. So let's create a project. So let's go here, create project. So I've got CircleCI in my head now. So I've got Clojure already installed. So this is Clojure CLI tools. Ooh, there we go. And I'm using this alias new, and this is using the CLJ new tool with Clojure CLI tools, and this will create me a new project based on the application template. This is the domain for the application, and this is the application's main namespace. And so I've already got dependencies for new, so it's just basically runs straight away. Let's create me a new project. And so if we go cd into random Clojure function tree, and this is just a simple relatively simple Clojure project. We've got our source branch and our test branch. And so these already have a default function and a default test function in their respective folders. And it's also got a deps file, which basically includes, here we're including Clojure itself as a library, which is really handy kind of approach because you don't need to install Clojure in your Docker image. You just need to install the Clojure CLI tools. That's pulling in the Clojure standard library for us. So it just simplifies the whole thing when Clojure is just the library itself. And then I've got an alias of test, and it's just adding the test path. We're not using test check yet, but this would be useful if we want to test our specifications. So like we did, we can wire up not just our unit tests, but we can get it to run generative tests based on our specifications as well. And then we've got runner. So this is just a generic name for the test runner. Specifically, this one's going to run the Cognitect test runner here. And so it's just pulling it down from Git. And so it's also going to, we're also going to get CircleCI to cache the Git, or the results of pulling down this Git build as well. So it doesn't pull that down each time, because when you're using if you're using a Maven version, so this deps, this is a Maven configured library, so it's just going to pull that and put that into the .m2 directory, whereas this one is going to put that into these GitLab Git directory as well. So we want to be able to cache that in our configuration. We don't need to add anything specific for CircleCI here. Just the test run you actually want to use. You do need to include that. You can't just use the whatever in the. You're not passing up the .clojure deps.edn file, so you can either have the test runner that CLJ new is using, or you can put your own test runner in here as well. You might want to use Clojure, as we saw, one of the tools we saw last week. And so you put into the local project deps.edn whichever test run you want, and if you're going to build some artifacts, then whichever tool you want to be able to do that as well. So if you were going to deploy something, then you would use uberjar or one of the other tools to be able to build a jar file for you, an uberjar, and that you can use that to deploy onto an application, some application server. So we created a project. I didn't put those as images. And then we want a remote repository to do that in. So we can go to GitHub, Practicalli. Oh, I already have one already. I'm going to rename that. It just sits out the way. Oh, yeah. Typing something. So if you go in and create a new repository, oh, that's different. Oh, you can use templates. That's something new I haven't seen on GitHub before. There we go. So just give it a name, which again is matching the project name, and give it a description, make it public. So you can use private repositories as well, but I'm not sure if you have to have like a paid account. I think you can use some private ones from the free plan, but you need to check that. I'm not going to add anything because I'm going to add that through just doing a commit. So I'm going to create a repository. And then I can use that to be able to basically just push whatever code I want in there to GitHub. So take the I'm going to take the address of that and just add that to my project. So if we open a file up, let's look. So this is our deps.edn file. Boom, let's make that bigger. There we go. And at the moment, it's not in a Git repository yet, so I'm going to create a GitHub repository locally. So I'm just going to create it inside the top level folder. Just going to create a Git, a local Git repository, and then I can add all these things in here. Get rid of that. I don't want that. Oops, no. So I can just stage these. Commit new project. So that's the new project created locally, and then I'm just going to add. So I'm just using capital M in Magit. So this is Emacs Magit I'm using, but you can use any Git tool, obviously. I'm just going to add a remote name. I'm going to call it Practicalli, and then just paste in the URL. And so this is going to wire up my local repository with the GitHub repository. So when I do p for push, I can push that up to GitHub, and then it's available in here. So this page will change to my code page. There it is, woohoo! So there's my project, but I don't yet have a configuration file. So I need to have a configuration file for CircleCI. So we're going to create a CircleCI config.yaml file in my project. So switch back to there, open a file up, CircleCI/config YAML, and then we've got our Blue Peter moment, one I created earlier. So this is a key point to getting it right. So this isn't in any of the CircleCI docs. I've basically taken their basic templates and then just tweaked a couple of things just to make it to run with Clojure CLI tools. So for the working directory, I'm using the specific name of the function. It seems to be a common approach. And then the most important thing to get right is the image. So here I'm using OpenJDK 11, which is what I'm using locally. And I've got the tools deps 1.10.1, 536. So that's what I'm using locally. So if I do Clojure -s describe, then it shows me what version of the tool I'm actually using. So I can see the install version of my Clojure CLI tool locally. And I know there's like the exact version I've got installed. Just to make sure, I mean, it probably doesn't work. It probably doesn't matter if you've got slightly different versions, but just for the sake of my own kind of paranoia about doing things, then it's always useful to have exactly the same setup in all your environments. Again, occasionally you'll get edge cases where it's working on one environment, it's not working on another, and then sometimes it's the specific bug in a specific tool that could be the problem. So having everything the same from development through testing through to production just helps minimize any kind of edge case issues like that. The environment ops, this is something that was already there with the CircleCI thing. So they do recommend putting a maximum heap size on there just to prevent out of memory issues with a Docker. Again, it's a Docker image. It's probably got a specific size, a memory footprint it's going to use as well. So we don't want to use all that up. But you can specify other, it shows you can specify all sorts of different Java virtual machine options in there as well. So if you need certain kind of configuration for Java itself, it's very easy just to pass those in. And these are things that you should also be using locally as well as you develop. If you're going to put these in, then yeah, use them locally. Use them again throughout your different environments just to make sure there's consistency there. And then we've got the checkout step. We've got the restore cache. So this is just basically again using the function, using the project name to uniquely identify that. And so it does a checksum on the deps.edn file. So it basically uses the project name with a unique ID on top of that as well. So when I first run that, there's not going to be any cache. So I need to download the dependencies. And this is what this next step does. So when I run it, I'm running Clojure. So I'm running Clojure CLI tool. And I'm basically saying download the resources for these two aliases. So there isn't anything, well, there's the test check for test, and then there's a Cognitect Labs test runner for that. And we're just using spath just to say, actually don't do anything else, just download the dependencies. So this is the equivalent of just doing line deps. So in Leiningen, if you do line deps, it'll just download the dependencies and then just stop. This is the same thing for Clojure as well. So you just basically get the dependencies. And so if we did Clojure A, it would actually try and run the test, but we want to download the dependencies in a separate isolated step, and then we'll run the test afterwards. Let's see if you do this on the command line. Again, you can just run this locally, and you can see exactly what it's doing. So it's I've already got the dependencies for test and runner locally in my .m2 directory and in my git cache as well. So it's not actually doing anything else. They're all there, and it's and then spath is just printing out the path, the class path that it's actually going to use as well. So this is quite useful if you need to do some debugging in your project. You actually see what class path is actually being used in your CircleCI environment as well, so it's quite useful. There we go. Anything else? Yeah, so this is what it's saying. So as well as the .m2 directory for our cache, we say we've got a path that picks up that, but we've also got this getlabs directory as well, which is where all the things we're pulling down when we're using Git rather than Maven, they're going to go into GitLabs. So it's just an extra part you would do for Clojure CLI tools. And then we would just run the tests, just running the Clojure. So this is what we would do locally. So we copy this and run it locally. That's not the right page. There we go. Then this will run our tests, and by default it's got a test. It's got one test in there already, but by default it doesn't pass, just to show that the test runner is running and picking up failing tests for me. So because 0 does not equal 1, not in this reality at the moment. So if I grab this, copy. There we go for time. Ooh, yeah. And paste this in there. Boop. Oh, sorry. Let's save that. Yeah, there we go. So that's saved it. And then if we go into go back into our Git client, and then I can stage the new file that we've added. And we do a push, and that goes up to Git GitHub, and we have where did I put that? I don't know. Yep. Too many tabs up now. So that's up and running, and we can now go in to CircleCI and go and create our project. Go and wire that up. CircleCI.com, go to the app, go to the dashboard, and let's see, I'm going to do it in here. So I'm going to select my, oh no, I didn't put it down, I have to do it in here when I, oops, there we go. So select the right organization, so I pushed it to Practicalli. Okay, that's interesting. Oh, that's quite good. I renamed this, and it's still it's realized that it's still following it correctly. So even if you rename something, it's see, CircleCI is managing to keep on following it. That's handy. So I don't have to reset up the project if I rename it. So let's do random. So I should have two. Oh, it's not picking up the. Let's unfollow that. Yeah, let's use this again. So if you do set up project on here, then it does prompt you to say, well, do you want to use this configuration? So this is the default configuration it suggests, and it's using Leiningen 2.7.1, which is quite old for Leiningen 1. It's probably not the version of Leiningen you're using locally. So rather than add the configuration, we're just going to add our manual configuration. Again, it's offering us to download it, but we don't want to because we've already got this as part of the repository. So we can just basically select start building, and because we've already got CircleCI build in there, then it's going to start building it as well. Let's see if we can get. It's not finding the new project I've added, probably because I've confused it. I wonder if there's a way to refresh it. Yeah, I was going to set up this Practicalli study guide. Oh yeah, there we go. Practicalli. No, GitHub. Practicalli. Oh, study guide. Let me just quickly create this new repository here. Random Clojure. There we go. Boom, create repository. Grab that. So I'm going to push this to a different. So we do. Configure, so I'm going to give the remote, and then I'm just going to update the URL. There we go. B and push. There we go. So this should be. There we go. So we've got code on different repositories. So if we go back to my CircleCI. Go into the other organization, it should find the project. Oh, that's interesting. It's not pulling up new repos. Well, that's a bit annoying. Why isn't it? Oh, no. Well, this is what you get for live broadcasting things. I'm not sure why that's not picking that up. Oh, why is that? Oh, Of course it's not. I did it in the wrong place. Sorry. I'm rushing. I'm not looking what I'm doing properly. Let's go to settings. I'm just going to transfer this over to let's just transfer this repository to the right organization. Oop. There we go. Oh, oops. Oh, wrong one. Group. So transfer that, confirm my password. Did I not call that? Oh, it's in the JRocket one anyway, so that's where I put it. So let's go to JRocket. There it is. Okay, so we set up a project. We're going to add manually. We're going to start building. And this is taking a little bit longer. So what it's doing, it's looked at the project. It's seen that there's a configuration .yaml file in the .CircleCI directory, and so it's running the build for us. And it's going to show you how long it's taking, when it started, which branch. So I'm using a branch called live, and this is a project it's from. It's using a particular workflow, and it's failed. And then we can look at, but at least it's running, so we can go and look at the build and see what's actually failed. And we can see that the test runner has failed. So it's actually running the test runner. We can see it's running the tests in the test directory, which is correct. We're testing the right namespace, and we're running the a-test. In the right test file, but it's failing because our tests actually fail, which is correct because our tests do fail. So it's working in the same way that it's working locally. If we go into our project and go to the tests, and then go to the test file, let's see, let's just do a simple fix. Okay, so now my tests should work locally, so I can test them. I can test them using a local test runner, either the one that's part of my editor. Oh, I don't have that set up properly yet. I can go in and run the test locally. Oops. And just to make sure that they're running, so that's what I would do. I'd run them locally, and if everything's okay, then I can go back to my editor and go in and do a git commit. So stage that, commit those fix tests. Hopefully you write a better commit message than that. That's a terrible commit message. There we go. And then I'm just going to push that to the Practicalli. I'm pushing that to JRocket randomly Clojure. And so then if I go back to my builds, if I go back here, it should be running a new one. Oh, did I push it? Did I push it? Yeah, I pushed it. Why is it not running a new one? Boo. No. No. Boo. Let's just go there. It should be running a new one. What? It should pick up a new bar. What have we done wrong? Did I push it to the right? I pushed it to the right thing, didn't I? Yes, push it to the right. GitHub. Push, push. Down. That's weird. Boom, boom, boom. There's also a terrible commit message elsewhere. Yep. So that's pushing. Interesting. Not sure what I've done there. Why do these things always fail when you're doing live broadcasts? Because if I go to random, if we go here, then in the projects I've got already, then it was actually just it was working just fine in here. If I go to the pipelines, then you can see when I'm pushing a repository, when I push a change, it's showing me the commit that's changed, and it's showing me the branch it's from. And so there could be multiple branches you're actually running tests against. It could be, I think by default it's running against all the branches that you push, but you can actually go in and change the workflow and specify specific branches as well. And then it's showing you success, whether it's successful or fail, and how long it took as well. So this is quite interesting, because if it's taking a long time, you might want to go in and kind of try and investigate why it's actually running slowly. So 27 seconds is pretty good. And you can also go in and like check to see whether there's any interesting information inside here as well. You need to set up environment variables as well. You can do that. You can set in your own. There's some CircleCI environment variables. But you can add your own to there as well. You can add those into project settings, and so you don't have to put the actual values in the code. You can add them to CircleCI. That's doing all stuff. Am I looking at the right one? Not sure why that's not working. I wonder if it's because I'm using live branch. No, it shouldn't make any difference. I'm going to investigate why that hasn't picked up on the changes. That's very strange. And one other thing you can do once you've done this, I mean, that's pretty much it. It was working yesterday when I set this all up. I guess it's got shy. It may be shy being on camera. And so the only other thing that's quite useful to add, especially if you've got an open source project that you want other people to use, you can add a build status badge. It's quite common. It's also useful to have this like for teams as well, because somebody can go in and have a look at a project and see whether it's built. So when somebody's pushed something, it's going to show you whether it's passed or failed. And you can just add this. This is just a markdown example. So it's basically just using the CircleCI image, scalable vector graphics image, and then you just specify the source of the project, so whether it's GitHub or Bitbucket, and then you've got Practicalli, which is the organization, and then the actual repository, and that's all there is to just adding that. And then you can go on to GitHub, Practicalli, and then there's the if you go to the project and look at the README, You can see there's a status there as well. And that's it. So apart from the fact that it didn't seem to want to run the tests again, it's working fine. I wonder if it's got confused by, because I've got quite a few things with similar names. Maybe I've confused it somehow, but I'll miss something off. But it's fairly simple, straightforward. Once you've got the build running, then you can carry on development locally. So I've got so you would then continue developing, and then after each push, then you can check the build status as well. And so it just gives you that extra step each time when you're building something. It's making sure that the tests are always run, even if you forget to run the tests yourself before you push them to GitHub or to a shared repository. It's always going to make sure that the tests are run, and if the tests fail, then obviously then you can it's not going to go into production if you've got it wired up into a pipeline that goes off and passes artifacts to a deployment environment. You've got an extra safety net that just runs automatically for you. It is useful to have your test run locally anyway before you do a commit, but if you don't wire that up, then at least you've got this happening. And if you're using feature branches or other branches other than the live one, then you can obviously have the tests running on those as well. Okie dokie. So apart from that little failure, then hopefully you believe that it all actually does work. And I'll go and figure out what it was that's actually failed and clean up my environments. But it's pretty simple. All you need to do is just choose the right image you want to work with, and just create a simple YAML file. And you'll probably do this for, if you're working in teams, you'll just create one for the team that's the default one, and probably put that into put like a template into some repository somewhere for all your configuration, and then you can just add this when you create a new project. You can just simply drop this file in, and just add the project on the dashboard, and off you go. Okay, well, I'm going to leave it there. So we're going to look at other things to look at around this is kind of deploying the results of building artifacts and deploying them to other services. So there's things like Heroku, which you can wire up to this. It'll just go off and deploy your application and have it live running on Heroku. That should be something that should be fairly easy to do for next time. And there's lots of other things. You can add as many steps in here as well as you want. There's also something called CircleCI orbs, which seem to be a way to kind of add common functionality to your build. So we do CI orbs. There we go. And one thing I did notice, there was a Clojure CircleCI orb. So yes, it's just reusable stuff that sets you up. So you can basically just use an orb, and you have a standard, just as a standard bit of process to your build. So you can have a pre-built orb. You create your own orbs as well. So if you've got some particular practices you want to do that, it's a simple way to add generic things that are happening in all the builds, basically. So have a look, see if there's some useful examples to include next time. Okay, well, hopefully you'll use CircleCI or some other CI service to be able to run your code and do integration testing. Because obviously you're gonna you can run the full suite of integration testing. That's one thing I didn't mention. We could actually run if we go to the config file, you can set up and run you might be running just like development tests. You might have like categorizations for tests. You might run by default run the development tests locally, so they run pretty quickly. But you could have a whole suite of tests running. Yeah, so you can make sure that all the tests run all the time before deploying the application as well. So we'll probably put some more in that as I create a bigger project which has got a range of different tests in there as well, and show that example. Okay, well, I hope you found that useful, and I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me. Again, if you want to get in touch, then Clojure in Slack Practicalli, and feel free to ask me questions. You can also send me a direct message on the Slack channel as well, and if you don't want to ask in public. Okay, enjoy the rest of the weekend and stay safe. Thank you very much. Goodbye.